Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Chrono Cross discussion series. This is video number 3. It will be the final video. And today I'm going to be talking about the music in Chrono Cross, as well as responding to some comments that I've received on the last 2 videos. Okay, listen, I've been really concerned about making this one. Mostly because I seem to be in somewhat of a minority, in my opinion, on the game's music. Now, before people freak out, I think it's a fantastic soundtrack. I think it's wonderful. I think it's really, really good. There's also been a lot of you who have commented on some of the previous videos that you can't wait for me to talk about the music. And I suspect that's because you want me to talk about how great it is. And I will, trust me, because I think that for the most part, it is absolutely incredible. Like, I've said this in the past, but Yasunori Mitsuda, of all of these old JRPG composers, is my favorite. And I really feel a lot of passion in the music that he writes. It comes very clear to me, like the emotionality of it, I guess. 90% of the game's music is just of that same stellar quality. The only caveat I have to it, and I want to start here so I can get it out of the way and then we can get into the really good stuff, is that I do not like the battle music in Chrono Cross. I don't think there's a single track, a battle track, in the entire game that I liked. Gale, the song Gale, I'm going to pull it up here for you guys, take a look at it. This is a song that I have found is a bit divisive on a lot of... because there's more than just this video I've kind of looked it up on. There are other forums on GameFAQs and stuff like that where people are debating back and forth whether or not this is a good piece of music or not. So it's nice to know I'm not alone. This is the song you hear when you get molested by clowns in hell. So there's like this extreme section of people who really, really hate it. And there are others who can't understand at all, like, why people don't like it so much. They're baffled. Let's see if I can give a crack at it and sort of try to explain what it is about this song that grates me a little bit. I want to say more than the phrases or the melody or anything like that. While I don't think that that's the best, in my opinion, I don't think that that's truly what makes it an annoying song for me, as much as it is the choice of instrumentation. You hear those strings right here. So there's a quality to it that feels a bit like fiddle-like. So for those of you who don't know the difference between fiddle and violin, they're essentially the same instrument. It's more or less a style of play that's different. On a fiddle, what they'll do is sometimes they'll grind down the bridge a little bit so that it's easier to hit two of the 4 strings at a time. It's a style of play where you're hitting 2 strings of the violin almost all the time. And there's something about this early part of the theme with the way that those strings are coming in, the sort of harmony between the two, that feels fiddle-esque to me. With the vibrato on it too. And I guess I just don't associate fiddle playing with, like, urgency, dangerous music. It's more of like a festive sort of sound, the fiddle is. And so there's just a quality to, I guess, the feeling that I get from this battle music that does not make me feel urgency or danger. And it feels a bit silly and a little bit grating to the ear. I mean, with all of it, really. I like this part. This part's kind of cool. and then it loops, right? But the loop is pretty short. Was that about 47, 45 seconds, something like that, a loop? So it's a pretty short loop. I remember in interviews for Chrono Trigger that Mitsuda was saying he wanted to write his loops as long as possible so that you didn't get a lot of repetition in the music. Tried to have his loops go, as much as possible over a minute, and if possible up to 2 minutes before the loop. And here we don't get quite to a minute before we loop it, so it's about 45 seconds. So you hear the same thing over and over and over again. Battle themes are really important in JRPGs because you do a lot of fighting. And you'll hear that song more than any other in the game. Kind of the main battle theme for the game, right? And so for me, it's really important to get that one right. And I don't know. I just don't like this one. It reminded me a little bit, not in terms of its melody or anything, but in terms of how it made me feel when listening to it, to the Final Fantasy V battle track, which is my least favorite in the Final Fantasy series. Again, it's the instrument choice. It sounds silly and weird and bouncy and bubbly. Okay, so here's the other battle theme. It's kind of like a boss battle theme. It's better. I think it's better than Gale. I like the percussion there. That's really nice. But it's the melody and sort of where the phrases land, like the notes on which they land. I think the instruments are chosen better in this one. It's mostly just brass that's blending that out. Oh, but there, you have that little arpeggio that plays, that descending arpeggio there. Right here. Here. The instrument choice for that, it's hard to hear like all of those notes distinctly, and that's a quality that you hear a lot in SNES sound fonts for OSTs. They're very percussive when they do those kinds of arpeggios generally, and so they're a lot more distinct. You hear all the notes distinctly, and it's really sharp and percussive. And here, it's kind of like, it's like the sound, the reverb on that string they're using sort of all blends together, and it makes it hard to hear all of it distinctly. So I don't like the choice of instrument for that particular part. There's a quality of the battle music here that feels bouncy. And then, of course, the final boss, there is no music being played there. It's just kind of this, you hear this sort of wind playing in the background. And I actually think that choice really works. And so, like, I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. But when we're talking about the greatest OSTs of all time, right? I think that battle music really is a large piece of that for me. And I would say none of the battle music in Chrono Cross does it for me. None of it. And one thing that also felt weird for me was when you finish a battle, they have the fanfare that plays, right? And it's a leitmotif of Lucca's theme. But what's so weird? It's big, high energy, loud, in your face. You won a battle. And then it just, like, drops all of that for this really, like, slow, peaceful arrangement of that melody. And if you compare that to the energy of the original song in Chrono Trigger, especially this part, it's, like, really high energy, right? And that's the way I would expect you would feel, or at least the way I think most fanfares play out when you've defeated an enemy in RPGs like this. They're like, pumped up, like, yeah, we won. And this version of the song makes me feel that kind of feeling. And this one just like, not at all. I actually pulled up one of my favorite remixes of this fanfare from Danimal. If you've never heard this, it also creates the type of feeling and high energy that I think works for a fanfare after you've won a battle. I freaking love this. Like, you're pumped! You're pumped after you won. It's like, freak yes. Give me that experience. Give me those level ups. Give me those items. Give me that gil. Like, you're pumped that you won the fight, right? At least that's the general feeling I would think you'd want to create in the player after winning a battle. And I felt it was a very strange choice to sort of have those loud, strong brass instruments carrying us into that, and then just sink us down to this. So I didn't like that. Okay, but that's just battle stuff. That's only battle music. Now that we've gotten all the battle music out of the way, the rest of the soundtrack is freaking like, oh, it's just amazing. It is amazing. I have a few here that I've pulled up in particular that I thought were great. Of course, Time Scar, which is the song that plays when you boot up the game before you get to the start screen. Amazing. I mean, just like the depth of feeling that Mitsuda, I should say, can pull from his sentimental tracks like this. I mean, it's unparalleled for me. I mean, he does it better than anyone else, in my opinion. And then, of course, you have this great percussion that comes in. Yeah, it's just fantastic. I mean, like, absolutely amazing track. We got those here. We got Frozen Flame. Like, this is when you think JRPG soundtracks, like great JRPG soundtracks, this is the kind of thing that comes to mind. Like this style of composing, the way they use harps for that sort of percussive movement that kind of hangs underneath the melody over the top. Just really, really great stuff. There's the Radical Dreamers version. Really good as well. Viper Manor is freaking great. I was listening to all the Radical Dreamers versions, but Girl Who Stole the Stars is one of my favorites from the soundtrack. Beautiful piece of music. Again, these more like sad or sentimental, heartfelt pieces from the soundtrack are just unreal. They're just amazingly well done. What's this? Oh, this is from my video. Let's come back to the soundtrack. I love a lot of the village themes too, like Arnie Village. Like, dude, can you get better village music than this? This is like quintessential fishing villager music. Like, this is the best fishing village music I've ever heard. Ephemeral Memory. I mean, so good. I could literally click just like at random on like any piece of music in this entire freaking thing. Forest of Illusion, what is this? Just a fantastic piece of music. Just like memorable. Sticks with you. I could hum this outside of the game. I really like that little vocal phrasing that he has going on there. Gives it like a real mysterious feel to it. Perfectly matches the environment of this particular forest. I mean, just the mix is so dynamic. It's really full. How they accent the vocal tone there at the top of the mix with that really deep bass underneath it. If you heard that, I really like it. Gives it a lot of depth. Super good. Let's see what else. Oh, I loved this leitmotif of the Chrono Trigger main theme. Ask anybody who was with me on the Patreon live streams while I was playing. Anytime this song came on, I basically was just like, I freaking love this song. I freaking love this song. I'd pause, wait for the melody to finish. I couldn't resist. Like, every time this came on, I had to stop and listen to it. A really, really cool remix, or rearrangement, I should say, of Chrono Trigger's main theme, which is one of the best songs of all time in its own right. Just love it. A little bit of that improv there with the notation. This kind of stuff, like freestyling here in a second with the guitar. Just so good. So freaking fantastic. And you know what song I really loved, though? Oh, holy crap. This Unstolen Jewel, which plays during the credits of the game. Oh, dude, just like, it gives me chills every time it comes on. Like, if this isn't my favorite, To Faraway Times is hard to beat from Chrono Trigger, which is the song that plays during the credits of Chrono Trigger. That's hard to beat for me. But this is up there. I mean, this song is up there with some of the best ending credits music of all time. Great voice, great choice of a singer. She fits the song perfectly. The melody is just so beautiful. It's phenomenal. You know, another song that really stuck with me, super memorable, you hum it for a while afterwards, easy to get stuck in your head, is the music from the Zelbes. Like, you can't help but move to this. Like, it's so good. Really great choice of instruments. Extremely well mixed. You can't help but bob your head to it. I mean, I could go on. Like, literally, like, any song on this soundtrack, aside from battle music, in my opinion, is absolutely phenomenal music. Hydra Swamp. This actually reminds me a lot of a Chrono Trigger sound with the bass. Really nice use of percussion throughout the soundtrack. Really, really nice. So, anyways, I could sit here and talk about how great most of these songs are forever. They're all fantastic. So, anyways, long story short, when it comes down to it, will I call this my favorite OST of all time? No, but only because battle music, when it comes to the whole piece, when we're looking at the entire pie, I guess, when we're talking about a soundtrack, I think within the context of the game, battle music is really important, and the battle music really falls short for me in Chrono Cross. But the rest of it is so good that, you know, I could see myself, you know, making a playlist with this stuff in it and just listening to it on end and never getting tired of it. It's timeless music. It's just really, really, really great. So, overall, huge fan of the soundtrack. But battle music did not cut it for me. So I can't say it's my favorite of all time, or even in my top 5. But if the battle music was better, it would be for sure. Okay, I want to use the rest of the time to respond to a few comments that I got on some of the previous videos. Aaron Armstrong says, when SNES Drunk did a review of Chrono Cross, I commented that it is not an easy game to review. I'm going to repeat to you what I said to him. In Chrono Trigger, you learn very early about the villain of the game. It follows the standard situation, exposition, action, story model that makes you feel heroic throughout the entire game. The information you get directly prompts you to take heroic action. Chrono Cross turns this on its head and follows a situation, action, exposition model that feels very different and at times jarring. It is, nevertheless, by design. Chrono Cross is the flip side of the high information hero. It is a story of the survivor. It is a story of the low information hero that knows only what needs to be done to get to the next step, but has no greater context to make it feel heroic. So I get where you're coming from with this, Aaron, and I don't disagree with the model, the situation action exposition model necessarily. It's not that that model doesn't work at all. It's just that when the exposition is given, so you have situation action exposition. Expositions come last. If you're going to save that for last and you're going to blow the player away with the reveals at the end, I still think they can be executed better than they were in Chrono Cross. And again, this is only for the background on like Chronopolis and Dinopolis and all the stuff that they say on Odessa Beach, the revelation that Wazuki is Link's, Wazuki is Serge's father. All of this stuff comes out of nowhere. Well, not all of it. The stuff on Odessa Beach is primarily what I'm talking about. With revelations like that. Just comes out of left field. It does not have a lot of impact because there wasn't a great setup for it. And so you can definitely do the situation action exposition model while still putting in really good setup for the payoffs when the exposition's delivered later. And I think that you can do a better job showing than telling, kind of like I talked about in that video. Not necessarily by relying on lazy tropes like flashbacks. You don't have to do it that way. In any case, I don't disagree with the premise of what you're saying in terms of the different models. I still think the exposition could have been delivered better in Chrono Cross. Throughout the years in several playthroughs, and specifically after playing Trigger, I came to understand the big flaw this game has in its exposition. That's exactly what you addressed in the video. I won't argue against that. However, it would be a shame if this would be the only focus, or I think he's trying to say my only focus on the story. That it has great ideas, but it's not well executed. The game has its big flaws presenting the story context, sure, but there's too many characters. There's too many characters, but I would like to push you into thinking about the story of Serge because this game has, in my humble opinion, one of the best silent protagonist character meanings and development in gaming. This reading of the game and Serge's story is, of course, personal, and therefore I don't know how much value it will have for other people. Okay, so he's giving a caveat there. Serge's story is one of the best portraits of the process of growing up, and beyond that is a perfect projection of the process behind the search for identity when stuck between two worlds or having something that sets you apart from the rest. However, when you finally make it back to Homeworld, you're basically back at the beginning. In fact, it's worse, because now you're Lynx, and not only do people not recognize you, but they downright hate you. So this is an interesting point, bringing up this idea of identity, searching for identity. I think a lot of Square games that came out at the time basically incorporated that theme, the search for identity. It's something that I think a lot of kids who grew up playing these games were going through in their adolescent years. Everybody starts to wonder, like, what do I want for my life? Like, who am I? How do I fit in? Like, what do I like? What kind of people do I want to associate with? That idea of searching for identity, I think, is a pretty strong theme in a lot of these Square JRPGs from the time. And I think that the point of him not being recognized upon first going back to Arnie Village in another world and then coming back as Lynx, and it's like not only do they not recognize you, they hate you, is an interesting point. I can kind of see where you're coming from with that. There are some other people who commented and said, you're focusing too much on the sort of like broader plot of the game, which, they would agree might not be as well executed as it could be, but that's not the point. It's more of a personal story of Serge and Kid. And there's part of me that feels like if that was the focus, if that was really what they wanted you to pay attention to, then it was a really confusing choice to have as many characters as they did, with as many like subplots as they did, if the game was meant to be like a really personal story for, say, like Serge and Kid, and why they wouldn't have included Lena into that mix, personally. So I think either way, whether you're saying, the larger plot was like the big focus of the story, or if it wasn't, it was more the personal stories of the characters, I still didn't really get hooked by them. I think that the story was distracted a little too much by how many characters there were and how many stories they tried to sort of delve into. I think they did really well on a lot of those personal stories. Like I like Riddell and Dario and Glenn, or not Glenn, Karsh, that whole story when you go to get the Master Mune, the story with Radius, and his encounter with the Masamune. I think that they did a really good job with like Fargo's story, for instance. Well, there are parts of Fargo's story that I questioned a little bit upon replaying on New Game Plus, wondering why he was kind of acting the way he was, despite knowing what he went through. But I think that they delivered pretty well on a lot of those. I think that the choice to make Serge a silent protagonist, I mean, for you wrote, not what the writer decided, Serge himself, to think about the situation. You yourself are imagining what you feel. I think from my discussions about Chrono Trigger and seeing where people fall on silent protagonists, it's almost like a 50-50 thing. Like 50% really don't like silent protagonists because you don't get quite the depth of feeling from a personal story. You don't really get the character development you look for from a personal story in a silent protagonist so much as you do from one who's fully fleshed out and has written dialogue. The other 50% say no, like you're saying here. I really like the fact that I could decide how to feel about it and sort of, see the world through Serge's eyes and imagine what that would feel like. So I think that is a thing that kind of falls, to just personal preference, as you stated here. For me, in particular with this game, I didn't quite feel for Serge as strongly as I would have liked to, and I think in this particular game it might have helped if he wasn't a silent protagonist. To sort of like really stick some of that feeling of not feeling like you belong and that sort of thing, because he doesn't really express that. I mean, that's something that you read into it by playing it, and that's completely valid. But I just feel like in this particular case, when you're telling a story that's meant to be really personal for the characters, that generally speaking, I'd rather not have a silent protagonist. But maybe that's just me. There's some more he said here, but I kind of want to focus on the first part here and this part, the smaller one-off stories, kind of being the focus, that it was engaging enough to follow those individual stories of the characters rather than focusing on the plot earlier or giving more of the main plot more evenly throughout the game, which was something I had talked about in the first video. And I feel you. Like, if you were really engaged with those smaller character stories, that's awesome. I'm glad that worked out for you. I think they executed fairly well for the most part for me as well. The one thing that I did think was kind of strange was that you start the quest on the Zelbus, where you're trying to persuade Fargo to let you talk to the sage so that they can sing the song and drive out all the monsters from Marbul. And Fargo is just resisting. You have kind of that whole section, that whole story that begins there, and then you lose gambling to Fargo. He takes your boat. Then you have to prove that he was rigging it and everything else, and then beat him at the game. And then he lets you talk to the sage, and the sage gives you the item you need to go to the Dead Sea. And then you kind of just take a break from that story. It's like you leave now to go to the sea, to the Dead Sea, and you're kind of doing a whole thing that's more plot focused before you can come back and finish that story up. So it kind of gives you like the first half of the story. Then, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have to then continue to the Dead Sea and do that part first before you can come back and finish this story. And so they sort of split it up like that in a way that I felt was a little strange. And I wasn't sure why they did that, why you couldn't have just finished that story while you were there. Why break it up like that and break the pace of it? So Fargo's story, in terms of the smaller stories you're talking about, had really good ideas, and I really liked it for the most part, but there were some execution parts of that I didn't think were the best either. Okay, we got Daniel here. First time leaving one of these comments. In any case, I agree with you that the plot of Chrono Cross is kind of a mess. Pacing can be all over the place, blah, 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 blah. The connections to Chrono Trigger happen. The main thematic elements of Chrono Cross, however, of its people and universe, are presented in a very unique way because they rest on the personal lives of many of its characters. Let's get out of the way the well-known criticisms of these elements. Too many characters? Yeah. These characters are dumb, weird, cute. I guess that's bad, silly looking. Sure. Very few are memorable, debatable, but even if you don't find many of them memorable, the fact is that the ideas around choice, regret, and consequences are beautifully illustrated in the different paths that we can witness through the two dimensions in the lives of Fargo, Radius, Zappa, Van, Glenn, Skelly, Pier, the fate of the Acacia Dragoons, the Marboul saga and how it involves Nikki and Irene's, the fate of Rasley's race, the annihilation of the dwarves, and Hydra. I did think that was well executed. Kind of how the dwarves were used in the game. I thought that was really well done. The personal conflicts of Doc and Greco and more. Not all 45 characters amount to something meaningful within the ideas of the game, but I think a lot of them present tough, intriguing, emotional, dark storylines condensed to their respective realities and conflicts, somewhat outside of the main plot. Even if the events of the game will, of course, affect everyone. But with ideas that expand and are more meaningful than, for example, the somewhat sappy soliloquy in the main ending. When Rasley's sister dies, she is gone, and we are responsible for that. Radius killed his best friend because he was jealous, and he's going to have to live with that. Fargo's patheticness divides a world that's already deeply troubled by discrimination, an important topic in Chrono Trigger as well, and ultimately the essential one in Chrono Cross, along with the environmentalism. These struggles shape the universe we inhabit and the ideas behind fate, responsibility, and being. This was a very good point. One that I agree with, actually. And I'm glad that you brought it up. I do think that the smaller stories of the characters in the game, the ones that are more fleshed out that you mentioned, they do a good job of highlighting these themes that you're talking about. I guess what I wish would have been the case is that they had tied those themes a little bit more clearly into the main plot so that they could supplement each other rather than making them feel separated. It's like, okay, you're doing this smaller story and you're getting this personal story with these great themes involved that are, beautifully implemented as you put it. But then you kind of like stop doing that to come over here and get more vague connections to Chrono Trigger, lots of dialogue, heavy exposition, crazy ideas that are, cool, but like, kind of hard to understand on the first playthrough. Then you kind of go, I wish those things were connected better. And that the plot itself and then the thematic elements of these little stories were interwoven, that they supplemented and supported one another and strengthened one another. If you feel like they do, and you'd like to counter me on that, please feel free to leave a comment on that and give me your perspective. I encourage you during your analysis of the game to explore Chrono Cross's thematic elements in the way I think the game is more interested in doing, not just by following the plot so much as by living in its world, getting involved in the different lives and universes present, and reflecting on the little details and decisions that we as Surge make. I will keep that in mind as I continue playing the game and doing my research on the game. So thank you very much for your perspective on that. I appreciate it. Okay, in the second video, talking about battle mechanics and stuff like that, a lot of you responded with the reminder that hit percentages are also affected by an evasion stat with enemies, and that's factored into it as well. I I want to reiterate, I don't think I made it... this is my fault. I think that I expressed more, I guess, annoyance with that than I should have. Because I really do think that the fact that you miss more often than you do in other RPGs is part of the game's balance. Like, I absolutely concede that point, and that, you know, it is the way it is for a reason. So, I guess what I was trying to say was that the only thing I would have changed about it was putting a number, like a hit percentage number there at all. I kind of like the way, like, that Xenogears did it, right? It was just triangle, square, X, and you just knew that X had the smallest chance of success but the highest damage. But it didn't, like, show you, like, you have a 90% chance of this being a success. I wish they had kind of taken that out. Because, yeah, I don't think that that number does represent the evasion stat of the enemies. So, whatever that number was, it felt like I was missing more often than what it said, and that created, I think, unnecessary frustration that could have been fixed by just getting rid of that number, that percentage altogether, and just having strong, medium, light, medium, strong, and you just know strong has the lowest chance of success, you're taking a risk, whatever. There were a couple of interesting comments along those lines in this video, though. Jordan Smiley here talks about having gone to... he's gone to school for game design. The most likely reason, in referring to hit percentage, the way it's handled in the game, in this case, is to encourage players to take risks and play the game more in line with what they, the developers, had planned. It is already a difficult decision to try attacking with a level 3 right off the bat, since there is a 70% hit chance, or hit rate. It is more likely that the hit rate is closer to 50%, but if that were accurately shown, almost no player would ever risk it. In fact, even when they increase its hit rate to the max, which would likely be doing more along the lines of 70%, they still may hesitate to use it. I see where you're going with that. It's like, well, we want them to take risks, so even though this, when you factor in the evasion stat of the enemy, is lower than 70%, it's lower than what we're showing, by showing 70%, we're incentivizing them to take risks. I still think you can do that without showing the number. Because I would do that in Xenogears and stuff like that. You still don't miss nearly as often in Xenogears, to be honest, as you do in this game. Again, it's fine, because it's part of the balance. But I think you can just do away with showing the percentage altogether, and you could even suggest, like, it's riskier to do this, but you do more damage, and incentivize people to try it, without actually giving them a misleading number. A lot of people were talking about the manual, read the manual, and then there was one from Chocolate Rob, if I can ever freaking find it. Okay, here. I'll just remind you that with games from this period, they all came with manuals. It was the job of the manual to explain game mechanics, not necessarily the games themselves. While we don't have that these days, we can't really criticize old games for it in the same way. I think I would agree 100% with this statement if we were talking about an NES title. Because the NES had limitations on text. Those limitations weren't nearly as strenuous, if even really a problem at all, by the time we got to the PlayStation. And if we look at Chrono Cross's contemporaries from Square, like Final Fantasy VII and VIII, which had lengthy tutorials that showed you how to do junctioning or how to equip your materia and whatnot, Chrono Cross doesn't really have anything like that for its element system. And then, in addition to that, first of all, it does have, I think, adequate tutorials for its battle mechanics, with the Radius tutorial in the village in the beginning, and then with the Salt and Pepper smaller tutorials that you do throughout the course of the game. So I think it explains its battle mechanics well enough, but I don't entirely agree that in these days it was the job of the manual to explain the game mechanics, not the games themselves, because we have so many examples from that time period where I didn't need to read Final Fantasy VII's manual to understand how to equip materia, how the battle system worked. It was all explained in the game. Same with Final Fantasy VIII's junction system. I was going to say same with Xenogears, but it's not actually true. They never explain to you in the game at all how you're supposed to unlock death blows. That's something people had to data mine to figure out. But, yeah, I mean, if we were talking about an NES game, I absolutely agree. I made some criticisms in jest. I was just joking about things like place names and enemy names and like that sort of thing in the first Final Fantasy on NES, and like most of that information was in the manual. You could read about how much HP they have. Like I think they had like a bestiary in it, basically. But by the time of the PlayStation 1, most games explained with tutorials within the text of the game, like how their systems worked. Most games did that. So I don't actually agree it was the job of the manual at this period of time in gaming history. But that being said, I think the game does just fine with the tutorials, the in-game tutorials that it has. I don't think you need to use the manual. He responded to me down here, agreeing about what I said about the UI being clunky. I think the main issue is that because Chrono Cross mechanics are so different to any other games, it's also a lot more difficult to smoothly explain and integrate them. That's true. We certainly have a harder time grasping new mechanics without something similar to relate to them. And I believe that's the entire reason why I had more of a struggle picking up on the mechanics and the UI of Chrono Cross than other JRPGs that I've played. Because they are a little bit different. When I say that I struggled, it's like, it took an hour, maybe, hour or two, to figure it all out. But once you figure it out, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, well, I think that for now, considering it is 3 o'clock in the morning, I should probably wrap this up. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this series. If you have anything else you would like to talk to me about or give me insight on regarding your feelings on the game, please do so now in the comments. I will try to read as many of them as I can and consider them as I move into the writing process for the video. Again, overall, I really like this game. I think it's really good, and I can't wait to do a little bit more research, maybe look a little deeper at some of those thematic elements that were mentioned for some of the smaller stories and the personal stories and how those all sort of relate to each other. I think that that's a really good launching pad for talking about where the game really succeeds in its storytelling. So I'll be looking more into that over the next couple weeks. Until Wednesday for our podcast, thank you for watching and have a great week.